Hard things become simple when the brain learns to obey. This audiobook delivers clear, practical steps to force your brain into action and build lasting discipline. In 10 powerful chapters, you'll rewire habits, master discomfort, sharpen focus, quiet fear, trigger momentum, hack motivation, convert procrastination, strengthen willpower, grow resilience, and command your thought. Hosted by Jessica on Premium Audiobooks, this episode gives tools, rituals, and daily strategies you can use immediately. Subscribe for consistent high-impact content that trains attention, builds character, and accelerates progress. Hit subscribe to join a community committed to doing what matters and transforming your life. Number 1. Rewire habits, conquer resistance, embrace discipline. Rewiring habits begins with a single honest observation. The hardest part is not the action itself, but the moment before the action. The squeeze of indecision that tightens the chest and shrinks the possibility of movement. That pause is where resistance lives. It looks like fatigue, boredom, distraction, a polite internal argument about whether the work is worth the discomfort. Resistance can be named, mapped, and then outmaneuvered. The brain will always prefer the path of least effort. The skill is teaching it that the easier path is the one that leads to consistent small wins. Discipline is not a brutal command from outside. It is the quiet architecture built around decisions, so the hard choices do not always need heroic willpower to be made. Start with clear, tiny commitments. A habit that tiptoes into life will stay. Pick one keystone action that reliably produces a beneficial ripple. 5 minutes of focused reading each morning. 2 push-ups after brushing teeth. Writing 1 sentence before checking email. Make the action so small that refusal feels sillier than compliance. This reduction is not a surrender to minimalism of effort, but a strategic compromise. Consistent minimal action rewires neural pathways. Every time the tiny action occurs, the brain records a new pattern. Repetition is the slow hammer that forges new grooves. Design the environment like a thoughtful architect. The body and mind respond first to what is around them. If the bedroom holds a phone lighting up with notifications, the willpower battle is handed to distractions before the day begins. Remove friction for the actions you want, and add friction for the ones that steal time. Place a book on the pillow. Keep workout clothes visible and ready. Put the phone in another room during focused work blocks. Place a payment app or website blocker, so accessing habit-undermining sites is deliberate and cumbersome. A single cleared surface, a packed gym bag by the door, a meal prepped in a glass container. These are the scaffolding of behavior change. Less reliance on heroic willpower, more reliance on physical cues that make the right move the default move. Create ritualized cues. Habit formation follows a loop. Cue, routine, reward. Be deliberate about the cue. Anchor new habits to existing ones. After pouring morning coffee, write a single line. After closing the laptop, do 3 minutes of stretching. These anchors, known as habit stacking, use existing neural habits as foundations for new behaviors. Cues should be sensory and immediate. The sound of a kettle, the texture of a keyboard under the fingers, the way daylight spreads across the desk at 6:30 a.m. Implementation intentions. The simple formula: when X happens, I will do Y. Turn vague intentions into automatic responses. Write them down and place them where they will be seen at the decisive moment. Use the 2-minute rule. Scale a desired habit down to something that takes 2 minutes or less. 2 minutes of habit can be expanded later, but the critical advantage is starting. The brain hates to begin. Once it starts, inertia often carries it further. If the goal is an hour of focused work, start with 2 minutes of writing or code. If the goal is daily exercise, start with 2 minutes of movement. Every time the short action occurs, the brain receives a clean piece of feedback. Action happened. Reward followed. Over time, the 2-minute seed grows roots and can support larger trunks. Track progress in a visible, physical way. Cross off days on a calendar. Place beads in a jar. Keep a habit scorecard in the same notebook used for planning. The visual accumulation of effort matters. Seeing a string of completed days produces its own momentum. Accountability magnifies this. Tell one trusted person about the habit tech. Post a brief daily status to a friend. Or use a public tracker. A modest social stake converts a private decision into a public one, and social expectations are powerful lever arms. For more stubborn resistance, use a commitment device, a financial penalty for missing a session, a signed contract with a friend, or a scheduled donation that triggers if a promise is broken. Commitment devices shift the cost of failure from emotional regret to tangible loss, making the path of discipline clearer. Prepare for the first resistance spike with a simple plan. Resistance will not vanish, it will adapt. Use premeditation malorum, negative visualization, to imagine obstacles and rehearse responses. Picture the day when fatigue has accumulated, when an unexpected meeting arrives, when the mood turns sour. Identify the specific cues that will tempt retreat and script an immediate response. If tired, perform a 2-minute ritual. If a meeting overruns, transfer the effort to a micro-task later in the day. If emotion rises, breathe and return to the concrete next step. Stoic practice does not remove hardship. It trains the response to it. The exercise is deceptively practical. The moment a temptation or obstacle appears, the plan already exists, and the brain can follow a practiced path instead of inventing excuses in real time. Cultivate the language used internally. Words shape action. Replace vague self-talk with clear Stoic phrasing. Not "I should probably exercise," but "this is the moment I go for 10 minutes." Replace moralizing failure. "I am lazy," with descriptive facts. A boundary was crossed, and the plan changed. The next action is to reset the rhythm. The voice that chastises endlessly drains energy. The voice that calmly states facts and issues a next step conserves it. Discipline is not about contempt toward the self. It is about steady instruction and compassionate firmness. A trained voice says, observe, adjust, build momentum through micro-wins that stack into identity change. Small victories accumulate into a new self-image. Someone who shows up. Someone who finishes what they start. Identity-based habits are more durable than performance-based habits. Instead of focusing purely on outcomes, answer the question, what kind of person does this action belong to? Act in ways consistent with that identity. Practice phrases like "I am a person who writes daily" before undertaking the small action, then act to prove the statement true. Each proof strengthens belief, and belief directs future behavior. The sensory memory of success, paper filled, muscles warmed, an inbox trimmed, becomes evidence the brain stores and trusts. When momentum stumbles, apply procedural simplicity. Replace complex plans with straightforward checklists. If fatigue or decision paralysis appear, ask, what is one non-negotiable action that moves this forward? Keep the path narrow and visible. Break projects into the smallest next steps and mark them off. The opposite of productive chaos is a small, clear sequence of actions that require minimal decision-making. This is the essence of discipline, removing choices at the critical moment, so action becomes inevitable. Honor recovery as a component of discipline. Hard work without rest undermines future effort. Schedule sleep, walks, meals without multitasking, and breaks that return attention rather than scatter it. A disciplined life is not austere suffering. It is strategic allocation of energy. Use rhythm. Work deep for a focused interval, then rest visibly. The contrast of effort and rest sharpens both. Sensory signals: cold water on the face, a brisk walk, a cup of tea taken away from screens. Reset the nervous system and prepare the mind to take on the next small battle. Create a relapse plan that is neither shaming nor permissive. Relapses happen. The difference between a stumble and collapse is the response. Script how many days can be missed before a reset routine kicks in. Define a restart ritual that cleans the slate without dramatizing failure. The ritual can be as simple as cleaning the workspace, writing a single sentence about what was learned, and resuming the tiny habit immediately. Discipline is a practice that tolerates setbacks because the system of habits, cues, and environment makes returns straightforward. Cultivate a daily review that is anchored in curiosity and clarity. At the end of each day, spend 5 minutes noting what worked, what failed, and the one clear step for tomorrow. This review is not an opportunity for self-flagellation, but an inventory for adjustment. Include sensory specifics. What time did energy dip? What provoked distraction? What environmental cue helped the habit stick? Use those details to refine the scaffolding. Over weeks, this iterative feedback loops into a robust architecture of behavior change. Finally, adopt a stoic posture toward control. Differentiate between what is in direct control, the choices around environment, the specific implementation intentions, the visible actions, and what is outside control, the weather, other people's schedules, random mood swings. Concentrate energy on the controllable elements and pre-plan responses for the uncontrollable ones. This focus channels determination into productive avenues rather than diffuse frustration. A short practical plan to begin. Choose one keystone habit. Make it 2 minutes. Anchor it to an existing cue. Prepare the environment so the cue is unmissable. Write one implementation intention in clear terms. Track the habit visibly. Name the first 3 likely obstacles and write scripted responses. Establish a tiny restart ritual for relapse. Execute this plan, and observe how small, consistent action accumulates into real change. The sensation of starting will be simple: a breath, a movement, a pen on paper, but the landscape of possibility will shift. Over time, the brain learns that the right move is also the easier move. Resistance loses its ferocity when confronted again and again with small, unarguable proof that action is habitual and reliable. Discipline becomes the quiet default, not a scarce, dramatic resource. The work that once required a heroic self becomes the life that the self lives by design. Number 2. Master discomfort through mental conditioning rituals. Discomfort is the quiet doorway to growth, yet the mind has been trained to treat it as danger. The moment something feels unpleasant, cold water, difficult conversation, silence before work, the brain's first impulse is retreat. But the truth is that comfort rarely teaches. It soothes, while discomfort refines. The process of mastering discomfort begins not by eliminating pain, but by conditioning the mind to interpret it differently. When discomfort appears, it is not an enemy but a signal that adaptation is near. The person who learns to stay calm in discomfort gains an immense advantage over the one who flees from it. Every transformation begins with exposure. Growth requires friction. To strengthen mental endurance, you must meet small discomforts daily and hold them long enough to dull their edge. This is not self-punishment. It is deliberate practice. Just as the body builds muscle through controlled stress, the mind becomes resilient through controlled challenge. A short cold shower, waking earlier than the body desires, sitting still with restless thoughts for 5 minutes, choosing to finish the final repetition in a workout, all are small acts of rebellion against the pull of ease. Over time, the unfamiliar becomes ordinary. The brain rewires to expect challenge rather than dread it. Mental conditioning rituals act as anchors. They remind the mind that discomfort can be entered willingly, survived, and even appreciated. Start by choosing a single ritual that triggers mild resistance. It could be breath-holding exercises, a daily fast, digital silence for an hour, or walking outside when the weather is unpleasant. The purpose is not intensity but consistency. Each ritual should begin and end with intention. Before starting, acknowledge the discomfort. This will not feel easy, but it will make me stronger. When it ends, recognize completion, the feeling passed, and I remain steady. This repetition builds familiarity, and familiarity breeds calm even under stress. Breathing is one of the most powerful conditioning tools available. Controlled breathwork teaches the nervous system that it can remain composed when tension rises. A simple exercise: inhale slowly for 4 counts, hold for 4, exhale for 6. Practice this during moments of mild discomfort, cold air, hunger, pressure at work. The slower exhale equals safety to the body, turning panic into presence. This trains the mind to stay rather than flee. Eventually, the same technique can be used during moments of greater challenge, public speaking, emotional confrontation, or physical strain. The ritual of breath becomes a lifeline, a way to return to composure when the environment feels unstable. Equally powerful is the practice of voluntary adversity. Modern life removes much of it, which weakens psychological durability. To reclaim it, inject chosen challenges into daily routines. Walk instead of drive. Carry groceries without complaint. Take stairs instead of elevators. Spend an afternoon without entertainment. Leave the comfort of heated air to feel the world as it is. These are not grand acts, but small symbolic ones. They teach the mind that struggle is a companion, not a curse. They also reduce fear of future pain because they make the unknown familiar. What was once intimidating becomes manageable because you've already met discomfort on your own terms. There is a rhythm to mental conditioning: exposure, endurance, reflection. Exposure introduces stress. Endurance holds steady through it. Reflection captures the lesson. Many people skip the last step, which is where the brain consolidates strength. After every uncomfortable experience, take a brief moment to articulate what was learned. Did the mind panic? Did the breath shorten? Did impatience grow? What was the turning point when discomfort began to fade? Writing or thinking through these questions after each ritual sharpens awareness. You begin to recognize that pain is rarely permanent. It crests and recedes like a wave. This insight dissolves fear of it. Self-talk during discomfort matters deeply. When the mind says this is unbearable, the body tightens, and the moment feels endless. Replace those internal phrases with neutral observations. This is heat. This is pressure. This is temporary. Naming sensations without judgment separates them from panic. Each label tells the mind that discomfort is data, not danger. This shift turns suffering into study. Athletes, soldiers, and monks all rely on this principle: control the narrative, and the experience transforms. The situation doesn't change, but perception does, and perception determines endurance. To master discomfort fully, expand awareness beyond physical sensations. Emotional discomfort often tests the mind more severely. Rejection, uncertainty, failure, and silence all stir an ache deeper than muscle fatigue. Use the same conditioning rituals here. When criticism stings, pause and breathe. When anxiety rises before a decision, stay present rather than distract yourself. When loneliness arrives, sit with it instead of running toward noise. Each emotional discomfort carries a lesson in patience. The more familiar these moments become, the less control they have over your choices. Freedom begins where avoidance ends. Morning and evening offer natural entry points for ritual. Begin the day with something mildly unpleasant, but purposeful. It could be a brisk stretch, a minute of cold exposure, or reading something intellectually demanding. End the day by reviewing one uncomfortable moment and noting how you handled it. Over time, this book ends your life with courage. The brain learns that discomfort is woven into the rhythm of existence. It is expected, managed, and integrated. This steady exposure inoculates you against chaos. When sudden hardship appears, you don't crumble. You recognize the familiar shape of challenge and step forward calmly. One of the strongest forms of mental conditioning is silence. In silence, the mind can no longer run from itself. Sit still for 10 minutes daily without input. No phone, no music, no distraction. Let thoughts surface unfiltered. The first few sessions may feel unbearable. Restlessness will rise. But if you stay, the agitation softens, and clarity replaces it. Silence is not empty. It is full of the truths we avoid. Learning to endure it sharpens discipline and reveals which discomforts are real and which are illusions. A quiet mind no longer panics at solitude or uncertainty. It becomes self-contained strength. Resilience also grows through controlled failure. Choose tasks that stretch capacity beyond comfort. Learn a complex skill. Practice public speaking. Lift slightly heavier weights. Write when uninspired. Expect to fail often, but treat each failure as a training repetition for courage. After every fall, ask one question: what small piece of this was within my control? Adjust that piece next time. Failure ceases to wound when it becomes a teacher. By intentionally meeting small failures, you remove their power to terrify. You realize that discomfort is the tuition for progress, and every mistake pays a part of that price. Physical rituals can reinforce mental toughness. Cold showers, fasting, barefoot walking, contrast baths, or endurance exercises condition the body to cooperate with discomfort. The key is gradual progression. Start small and increase exposure incrementally. The goal is not exhaustion, but adaptation. As the body adapts, the mind's threshold for stress rises. Tasks that once caused hesitation become effortless. This transfer of resilience from physical to mental domains creates an inner posture of stability, a calm that endures beyond circumstance. The Stoics taught that voluntary hardship is preparation for involuntary hardship. When life inevitably brings loss, fatigue, or disappointment, the mind that has practiced discomfort stands ready. It does not collapse under pressure, because it has rehearsed the response. It has tasted hunger and learned patience, faced fear and discovered calm, endured boredom and found focus. This readiness is the essence of strength. Not arrogance or denial of pain, but acceptance of it as part of the human condition. True peace comes not from escaping hardship, but from mastering the self in the midst of it. To live this way requires mindfulness in motion. Every uncomfortable moment becomes an opportunity for conditioning. Traffic becomes a lesson in patience. Repetition becomes training for persistence. Criticism becomes practice for humility. The discipline lies in noticing discomfort and using it consciously. Each time you stay present rather than retreat, you reinforce the neural pathway that says, "I can handle this." With repetition, this belief becomes fact. You no longer wait for perfect circumstances to act. You move because you know discomfort cannot destroy you. The process is slow, sometimes tedious, but profoundly liberating. Through steady rituals of discomfort, you stop negotiating with every difficult feeling. You develop quiet confidence rooted in experience, not theory. The external world remains unpredictable, but your internal state becomes reliable. The storms still come, but you know how to stand in the rain. When the brain understands that discomfort is survivable, it stops wasting energy fighting it. That energy turns inward toward growth, creation, and focus. This is mastery, not control over every outcome, but command over your response to it. In that space between reaction and action, strength is born. Number 3. Train focus, eliminate distractions, build momentum. Focus is the rarest currency in the modern world, and the one that determines who rises and who remains distracted. The human brain was never designed for constant stimulation, yet every screen, notification, and open tab competes for its attention. To train focus is to reclaim control over the most powerful instrument you possess, your awareness. When focus becomes disciplined, life simplifies, tasks finish faster, clarity sharpens, and the restless noise within begins to quiet. The goal is not to remove all distraction, but to develop mastery over what receives attention and what does not. True focus begins with intent. Most people move through the day reacting to impulses rather than acting from purpose. Before each task, take a moment to decide why it matters. Clarity of purpose turns attention from a fragile flicker into a steady flame. Write down the day's single most important objective, not a list of 10, just one. The mind performs best when it knows exactly what to pursue. Once the target is clear, attention can be trained like a muscle to stay on it. Eliminating distractions starts with designing the battlefield, not relying on willpower. Environments shape behavior more than motivation does. A cluttered workspace invites mental noise. Simplify the surroundings. One tool, one task, one open page. Every visual item should earn its place. Physical order reduces cognitive friction. A phone left in sight is an unfinished conversation with the world. It demands attention. Remove it from reach when deep work begins. Silence notifications, block digital temptations, and make the workspace a declaration of intent. When the environment supports focus, energy once wasted on resisting temptation becomes fuel for concentration. Train focus through single-task immersion. Multitasking is not efficiency, it is fragmented attention. The mind switches rapidly, losing seconds and clarity each time. Choose one task, set a timer for a defined period, and commit to it fully. The Pomodoro technique, working in focused intervals with short breaks, works not because of its timing, but because it honors boundaries. During focus blocks, nothing else exists. The moment temptation appears, acknowledge it and return attention to the task. Each return strengthens mental endurance, just like returning to the barbell strengthens muscle. The brain thrives on rhythm. Build a daily schedule that protects deep work at consistent times. Early morning or late evening when the world is quieter provides fertile ground for concentration. Repetition conditions the brain to associate those hours with focus. The first few sessions may feel scattered, but consistency converts struggle into ease. Over weeks, focus becomes automatic during those windows. This is the architecture of flow, a predictable rhythm that invites immersion. Momentum is the reward of sustained focus. It is the invisible current that carries you forward once inertia is broken. The key is to begin without waiting for motivation. Action itself creates the state needed for further action. Start small. Write one paragraph. Solve one problem. Make one call, and the mind warms up like an engine. Momentum builds from completion, not contemplation. The moment something is finished, however minor, a psychological loop closes, releasing energy for the next step. Those who understand this principle stop seeking inspiration and instead cultivate momentum through continuous motion. Focus sharpens through deliberate mental fasting. Just as the body benefits from rest, the mind benefits from silence. Periodically disconnect from all inputs, social feeds, news, noise, and allow the brain to recover from overstimulation. Stillness resets attention. Even 5 minutes of mindful breathing or slow observation of your surroundings strengthens awareness. In these pauses, the nervous system recalibrates. When you return to work, attention feels fresher, sharper, and more directed. Without these pauses, focus fatigues, and productivity becomes hollow busyness. Attention is energy, and like all energy, it follows what is valued. To sustain focus, elevate the importance of your work internally. Attach meaning to effort. When every task connects to a larger vision, learning, mastery, contribution, attention aligns naturally. A person who knows why they are working does not constantly question whether they should. Purpose is the strongest anchor for focus, because it transforms discipline into devotion. Learn to notice the exact moment the mind drifts. Distraction rarely announces itself loudly. It creeps in subtly. A quick glance at the clock, a wandering thought, a flicker of boredom. These are early signs of attention fracture. Catch them early and bring awareness back. This simple act of noticing and returning is the essence of mental training. Over time, the brain learns to resist the urge to escape discomfort and remain within the boundaries of concentration. Every return strengthens the neural pathways responsible for sustained attention. Train attention like an athlete trains endurance. Begin with short periods of focus and gradually extend them. Start with 20 minutes of uninterrupted work, then 30, then 60. Treat distraction not as failure but as feedback. When focus collapses, examine what caused it: fatigue, hunger, clutter, emotion. Address the cause rather than blame the will. Attention is finite. Conserving it requires management of energy, not just effort. Sleep, nutrition, hydration, and movement all directly affect cognitive clarity. A rested mind can concentrate far longer than an exhausted one. Build rituals that prepare the brain for focus. Lighting a candle, putting on specific music, organizing tools. These are not trivial gestures. They act as cues, signaling the transition from ordinary awareness to deep work. Over time, the ritual itself becomes a psychological doorway into concentration. Athletes warm up their bodies. Thinkers must warm up their minds. This small investment of intention sets the stage for immersion. Momentum requires continuity between tasks. When finishing one piece of work, take a brief note on what to tackle next. This keeps mental threads connected and reduces restart friction later. Avoid long gaps between effort and resumption. Returning to work cold demands greater energy. Even a brief outline or a single line written before stopping creates a bridge into tomorrow's focus session. Momentum is maintained not by speed but by consistency of direction. To guard focus, cultivate detachment from trivial urgency. Many distractions masquerade as important because they are immediate. Emails, alerts, messages, all pull attention toward what is loud rather than what is meaningful. Develop the discipline to delay response. Not every demand deserves instant access to your mental space. Prioritize by impact, not immediacy. A simple rule: if it will not matter in a week, it does not deserve your peak focus today. Protecting attention from trivialities is an act of respect toward your future self. Train the ability to enter deep work quickly through a pre-focus ritual of breathing and visualization. Spend 1 minute imagining the task completed successfully, then 1 minute calming the breath. Visual rehearsal primes the mind for action. This practice reduces resistance to starting and accelerates immersion. The mind begins to associate the ritual with productivity, allowing rapid entry into concentration. Momentum thrives when feedback is visible. Track progress in tangible ways: pages written, minutes focused, repetitions completed. Seeing progress transforms discipline into satisfaction. Each mark of completion releases dopamine, reinforcing the desire to continue. Without visible progress, the brain loses motivation, even if effort is high. Make your advancement obvious. It reminds the mind that movement forward is happening. One overlooked pillar of focus is the management of mental clutter. Unresolved thoughts consume attention silently. Write down loose ends before working, reminders, worries, to-do items. Offload them from memory onto paper. This externalization clears cognitive space for the task at hand. The mind performs best when it is not juggling invisible loads. A clear mental desk, like a clear physical one, invites precision. Momentum compounds when you end work sessions with energy still in reserve. Stop before exhaustion. This creates anticipation and eagerness for the next session. The unfinished spark keeps the mind engaged subconsciously, preparing ideas in the background. Beginning the next day becomes easier because the brain already knows where to resume. Ending on a high note transforms work into rhythm rather than grind. Focus, once trained, becomes self-reinforcing. The satisfaction of deep concentration replaces the fleeting pleasure of distraction. You begin to crave the state of flow where time dissolves and effort feels effortless. The more often you enter this state, the faster you return to it. The brain learns that fulfillment lives in depth, not in scattered novelty. At the heart of it all lies presence, the art of being entirely where you are. When the mind stops oscillating between regret and anticipation, focus becomes natural. Each moment receives full attention, whether in work, conversation, or solitude. This level of presence builds an inner stillness that powers outward excellence. Distractions lose their grip because attention has found its home. A disciplined focus does not happen by accident. It is built through hundreds of small choices made consciously each day. The choice to start when it would be easier to scroll. The choice to finish when fatigue whispers to stop. The choice to ignore noise and honor one commitment fully. These choices stack into identity. Over time, you become someone who follows through, who works deeply, who moves steadily forward. That identity fuels momentum greater than any temporary motivation, and in that forward motion lies mastery, the ability to direct your mind toward what matters and keep it there until it's done. Number 4. Override fear. Act fast, think later. Fear is the mind's oldest defense, and its most persuasive liar. It speaks in reasonable tones, convincing you to wait, to think it through, to prepare more before moving. It hides behind logic, disguising hesitation as wisdom. Yet most of the time, what we call thinking in moments of fear is not analysis. It is avoidance dressed as prudence. The truth is that clarity rarely comes before action. It arrives after movement begins. The mind understands best through experience, not speculation. To override fear is to move while it still whispers, to take the first step before comfort appears, and to let action carve the path that thought could never map fully. The human brain evolved to avoid danger, not to chase growth. It confuses risk with threat. The same system that once saved us from predators now triggers when we face an uncomfortable email, a stage, a blank page, or a new challenge. The pulse quickens, the stomach tightens, and the brain floods with what-if scenarios. But most of these fears are false alarms. They predict humiliation, failure, or pain that rarely materializes. Understanding this biological trick is the first key to power. Fear is a reflex, not a prophecy. It can be observed without obeying it. The gap between impulse and action is where fear breeds. The longer you stand still, the louder it grows. The simplest way to weaken fear is speed. The quicker the decision converts to motion, the less room the mind has to invent catastrophe. This is why the most decisive people seem fearless. They're not immune to anxiety. They simply act before it takes shape. The body in motion quiets the mind in doubt. Thinking later doesn't mean acting blindly. It means trusting that momentum clarifies faster than hesitation does. Once you start, fear has fewer places to hide. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of response. Every brave act begins with trembling hands and a racing heart. The difference between those who act and those who freeze is the decision to move despite the feeling. Courage grows from small demonstrations. Send the message you've delayed. Speak up when silence feels safer. Approach the conversation that discomfort has postponed. Each completed act becomes evidence that fear's stories are unreliable. The more often you defy it, the weaker its authority becomes. Over time, the brain learns a new rule. Fear predicts opportunity, not danger. Action breaks paralysis. The first second after deciding is the most critical. That is when hesitation tries to return. Bargaining for delay. Count backward from 5 and move before the count ends. This simple trigger cuts through hesitation's arguments. 5 seconds is too little time for the brain to sabotage itself. Step forward, open the door, dial the number, begin the sentence. Once motion starts, the mind's narrative shifts from "I can't" to "I'm already doing it." The physical act of beginning rewires mental dialogue faster than reasoning ever can. Fear often disguises itself as preparation. People say they are waiting until they feel ready. But readiness is a mirage. The brain creates endless criteria that must be met before action feels safe. More knowledge, more time, more approval. Yet the world's most capable people rarely begin in certainty. They act with partial information and refine through feedback. The difference between success and stagnation often lies in the willingness to risk imperfection. The one who acts imperfectly learns faster than the one who plans perfectly but never begins. Movement converts ignorance into understanding. To override fear, create rituals that shrink decision time. Prepare in advance for moments of hesitation. Write if-then statements. If I hesitate to speak, I will start anyway. If I doubt my idea, I will share it once. If I fear rejection, I will still apply. Pre-decided commitments. Remove the need for in-the-moment bravery. The plan handles courage for you. When the moment comes, follow the script and act before emotion negotiates. Each time you honor the script, confidence grows not because the outcome is perfect, but because the self-trust deepens. Fear thrives in imagination, but dies in exposure. The mind magnifies unknowns. What you anticipate is nearly always worse than what occurs. To dismantle this illusion, practice gradual exposure to what intimidates you. Speak before small groups before addressing large ones. Publish small works before bigger ones. Introduce yourself to strangers before pitching an audience. The nervous system adapts each time. Familiarity drains fear of its drama. Eventually, the brain interprets these once threatening experiences as normal. You begin to act naturally where others still hesitate. Speed does not mean recklessness. Acting fast means acting decisively, not thoughtlessly. It means replacing endless internal debate with quick, informed commitment. Quick action comes from knowing core values and priorities. When those are clear, decisions simplify. Fear loves ambiguity. It feeds on uncertainty. When you know what matters, you can act with confidence even in discomfort. Decisions made from values rarely require reconsideration because they align with identity. The question becomes not "what if I fail," but "am I being who I choose to be right now?" Thinking later means allowing reflection after experience, not before it. Reflection post-action carries data, while pre-action speculation carries assumption. Once something is done, you can analyze what worked and what didn't with accuracy. Beforehand, you're only guessing. That's why action-first people improve rapidly. They collect real feedback. Fearful people remain in theory, trapped in rehearsals that never happen. Progress favors those who learn by doing. Even a small failure is more educational than a perfect plan untested. The world rewards motion because motion refines thought. To weaken fear's influence, Shift focus from outcome to process. Fear obsesses over what might happen, but courage concentrates on what must be done now. The present moment is narrow, and fear cannot survive there. Breathe deeply, ground yourself in immediate sensory experience, and perform the next small action. Fear evaporates when the mind is anchored to physical reality. You can't panic and focus simultaneously. Every time you redirect attention to action, anxiety loses power. This habit eventually becomes instinct. Mentally rehearse acting under fear. Visualization builds familiarity before experience. Picture yourself facing a challenge, feel the tension, then imagine executing calmly anyway. The brain responds to visualization almost like real exposure, creating neural readiness. When the real moment comes, the mind recognizes the pattern and moves fluidly. This technique, used by athletes and performers, reduces the startle of fear and increases fluidity under pressure. Training the mind this way makes courage automatic rather than forced. Surround yourself with people who move quickly. Energy is contagious. Environments that reward action breed momentum. Observe how decisive individuals operate. They make small, fast choices daily without dramatizing them. Imitate that rhythm. Each quick completion builds a psychological loop of confidence. Delay, on the other hand, erodes trust and cess. The longer you avoid something, the larger it grows in imagination. Rapid execution prevents that inflation. Fear loses strength when given form. Write it down. Describe exactly what you're afraid of and what the worst outcome would be. Seeing it on paper often exposes its exaggeration. Then, outline what you would do if that outcome occurred. The mind relaxes when contingency exists. You realize that even if the worst happens, it is survivable. This turns fear from a shadow into a manageable plan. Physical movement helps override psychological paralysis. When anxiety builds, walk, stretch, breathe rhythmically, or change posture. The body informs the mind. Movement interrupts the feedback loop of fear. Adrenaline wants release. Channel it through motion. When you move purposefully, the energy of fear becomes the fuel of focus. The chemistry of anxiety and excitement is nearly identical. The difference lies in interpretation. Train yourself to interpret the rush as readiness instead of warning. The moment after fear is conquered is silent, steady, and powerful. It brings a brief calm unlike any comfort zone can offer. You stand on the other side of hesitation and realize it was never the world that was dangerous. It was your own imagination. That realization becomes armor for future challenges. Every conquered fear makes the next easier to face. Confidence is cumulative. It's built one decisive act at a time. The art of overriding fear is not about eliminating caution, but preventing paralysis. It's about learning that thinking later allows the mind to work with evidence instead of anxiety. Fast action bypasses overthinking and gives fear no time to grow roots. The more you live by this rhythm, the lighter hesitation feels. You stop waiting for courage to arrive. You build it by moving. Fear turns from a wall into a compass. It points to the exact place where growth waits. Each time you follow that signal, life expands a little wider. And the person you were afraid to become slowly becomes the person you already are. Number 5. Use micro wins to trigger massive action. Massive action rarely begins with grand inspiration. It begins with a single, almost insignificant victory. A moment so small it barely seems worth celebrating. Yet that small success is the spark that lights the chain reaction of momentum. The human mind thrives on proof, not promises. When it experiences progress, even at the tiniest scale, it releases energy and confidence that demand continuation. Micro wins are not trivial. They are the building blocks of transformation. They teach the brain that effort equals reward, and that simple pattern repeated often can move mountains. The trap most people fall into is waiting for a big moment to start. They want motivation to arrive fully formed, as if a surge of inspiration will suddenly make everything easy. But motivation is unreliable. It fades as quickly as it appears. Momentum, however, is earned through action. Micro-wins are the mechanism by which momentum begins. They bypass the need for motivation entirely because they are small enough to start immediately. You don't need to feel ready to do something tiny. The act of completion, no matter how minor, awakens energy that was dormant. Each micro-win tells the brain, "I'm capable." It's a message that overrides doubt. Write one paragraph instead of waiting to write a book. Walk for 5 minutes instead of promising a marathon. Clean one drawer instead of dreading the whole room. The scale is unimportant. What matters is finishing. Completion gives closure, and closure gives confidence. The satisfaction of a finished task, however small, triggers dopamine, the brain's reward signal. This chemical reinforcement is not abstract. It's physical proof that success feels good. That pleasure builds anticipation for the next step. Over time, the craving for that small victory becomes a habit loop that sustains long-term achievement. Micro wins are not about lowering standards. They are about breaking resistance. Large goals overwhelm the mind because they appear too distant to control. The brain prefers immediate results. By dividing monumental objectives into digestible actions, you create continual success feedback. Every completion becomes an energy deposit. A single day filled with small completions feels more empowering than a week spent overthinking a perfect plan. The person who finishes one thing daily outpaces the one who endlessly prepares for the ideal moment. Progress accumulates faster than perfection ever could. Momentum requires visible movement. Track your micro wins so the mind can see its own progress. Whether through a checklist, a habit tracker, or a written journal, record what was done. Even the act of marking a box satisfies the need for closure. It transforms invisible effort into tangible evidence. When progress is seen, belief strengthens. When belief strengthens, action multiplies. This self-reinforcing loop is how consistent effort turns into massive output. What begins as a simple streak becomes identity. You no longer ask if you can, you know you will. Micro wins train focus through simplicity. Large goals scatter attention across too many variables. A small win demands only one thing. Finish what's in front of you. This singularity of focus dissolves distraction. When the mind knows exactly what to do next, hesitation loses its footing. The completion of one step naturally reveals the next. You stop needing to map the entire journey. You only need to take the next obvious action. This rhythm, start, complete, start again, creates flow. Massive achievements are rarely sudden leaps. They are the sum of hundreds of small completions strung together without interruption. When resistance appears, shrink the task again. If something feels too heavy to begin, make it smaller until the weight disappears. 5 push-ups instead of 50, 1 page instead of 10, 5 minutes of practice instead of an hour. The brain resists discomfort, not duration. Once movement starts, inertia favors continuation. Many times, what begins as a small session transforms into a full effort, simply because the mind has crossed the threshold of beginning. This is the hidden power of micro wins. They remove friction by making the starting line effortless. Small victories also reprogram identity. Each time you complete a task, you reinforce a version of yourself that follows through. Over days and weeks, this repetition forms a new self-concept. Someone who acts consistently, not sporadically. Identity drives behavior far more than willpower. Once you begin to see yourself as reliable, the mind protects that identity by maintaining it. You no longer rely on emotional highs to act. You act because it feels natural to do so. Consistency stops being effort and becomes expression. Micro wins accumulate into momentum that carries through obstacles. When a difficult day arrives, the established pattern of completion helps you move forward even at low energy. You've trained the brain to find satisfaction in small finishes, so even minimal effort counts as success. This prevents the all-or-nothing mentality that derails progress. A single productive moment on a bad day keeps the streak alive. The momentum never truly stops. It merely slows and waits for strength to return. This resilience, built through micro wins, is why consistent people outperform intense but inconsistent ones. To multiply results, link micro wins into clusters. Stack 2 or 3 small actions back to back in a short burst. The sense of rapid progression generates enthusiasm. It's easier to maintain energy when the mind experiences quick, successive success. For instance, after completing a short workout, immediately organize your workspace. Then reply to one pending message. 3 victories in 15 minutes can transform the entire tone of a day. Momentum thrives on pace. When it builds early, it influences every decision that follows. Rewards reinforce effort, but timing is key. Instead of rewarding only big accomplishments, acknowledge the small ones too. A moment of self-recognition, a breath of satisfaction, or even a verbal done tells the brain the loop is complete. This reinforces repetition. However, avoid turning rewards into distractions. The celebration should enhance focus, not break it. The true reward of a micro win is not the treat, but the sensation of progress itself. When you learn to enjoy the process of completion, you become unstoppable because every step feels like success. Micro wins also train emotional regulation. Big goals often trigger anxiety because they highlight the distance between where you are and where you want to be. Small goals shrink that distance until it feels conquerable. You focus on what can be done now, not on what remains undone. This reduces overwhelm and keeps emotions steady. You're not fighting your own frustration, you're nurturing satisfaction one step at a time. This emotional stability is the foundation of sustained performance. Each micro win is a message to the subconscious. Effort matters. The more consistently you reinforce that message, the more automatic action becomes. Soon, starting becomes easier than avoiding. The brain's wiring shifts from comfort seeking to completion seeking. You crave progress the way others crave escape. This shift is profound because it turns discipline into instinct. When progress becomes pleasure, persistence becomes effortless. Massive action, when viewed from a distance, looks like bold, sweeping movement. But up close, it's thousands of tiny victories stitched together. Every masterpiece was built one line, one brushstroke, one decision at a time. The person who embraces micro wins understands that no step is too small if it moves them forward. Even an inch a day is progress, and progress compounds quietly. To sustain this system, set clear cues for action. Choose a specific time or trigger that signals the start of your micro win routine. It could be the moment after waking, after coffee, or after finishing a task. Ritual creates automaticity. When the cue arrives, the brain moves without negotiation. Over weeks, this turns effort into rhythm. Micro wins become woven into the fabric of the day rather than isolated events requiring decision. There will be days when progress feels invisible. Those are the moments when the philosophy of micro wins reveals its true value. Even when the big goal seems far away, you can still complete something. Fold one piece of the problem, solve one small part, tidy one corner. The feeling of control returns, and with it comes calm. In motion, clarity returns. Every act of doing chips away at inertia until action becomes the default again. Massive action does not come from waiting for a breakthrough. It emerges from continuous motion built on micro wins that never stop. The compounding effect of daily progress is relentless. What feels small today becomes significant tomorrow. The mountain is climbed not through leaps, but through 1,000 steady steps taken without pause. Each micro win is a reminder that progress is always available, that success is not a distant event, but a daily choice. When the mind learns to celebrate the small, it unlocks the capacity for the extraordinary. That is the quiet power behind all great achievements. Not one giant act of courage, but 1,000 humble victories executed with steady faith. Number 6. Hack motivation loops with deliberate daily effort. Motivation is a fascinating illusion. Most people wait for it as if it were weather, something external that must arrive before movement begins. They think action follows feeling, that the right spark will suddenly make the hard work easy. But the truth is much simpler and more liberating. Motivation follows action, not the other way around. The human brain is designed to respond to momentum, not to waiting. When you begin to move, even without inspiration, the mind rewards you with energy to continue. This is the loop most people misunderstand. The cycle where deliberate effort generates the very motivation they think they lack. The mind operates through patterns of reward and anticipation. Each time you complete something meaningful, it releases dopamine, a signal that tells the brain, "This is good, do it again." But here's the secret. Dopamine is not released only when you finish. It's also released when you anticipate success. By building small, consistent routines that create regular anticipation and completion, You can hack your own motivation system. You no longer have to wait for mood or emotion to cooperate. You manufacture drive through structure. Daily effort is the trigger that keeps this loop alive. When effort is applied at random, the brain treats it as chaos. It can't predict reward, so it doesn't release energy. But when effort is deliberate, consistent, patterned, and repeatable, the brain learns the rhythm. It expects the satisfaction that comes after effort. The act itself becomes pleasurable because the mind associates it with progress. You stop needing emotional fireworks to act because action itself begins to feel like a reward. This is why discipline often feels effortless once it becomes habitual. It's not that disciplined people have superhuman willpower. It's that they've conditioned their brains to crave the satisfaction that follows effort. They've built predictable reward cycles around their actions. They understand that the fastest way to feel motivated is to do something that proves progress. The loop is simple. Act, experience progress, feel rewarded, crave more action. That's the engine of self-propulsion that powers extraordinary achievement. Hacking motivation begins with designing triggers for action. A trigger is a cue that signals the start of effort. It can be a time, a place, a sound, or a simple routine. For example, starting your work immediately after morning coffee, or writing your goals while your computer boots up. These cues condition the brain to associate the trigger with performance. Once the association is strong, the cue itself begins to create motivation. You no longer need to think about starting. The body moves automatically. This is how athletes, artists, and soldiers maintain consistency. They rely on triggers, not inspiration. Deliberate daily effort is not about intensity. It's about precision. Working hard sporadically burns energy, but builds little. Working steadily at the right rhythm builds endurance and confidence. The goal is to make effort non-negotiable, to place it so deeply into your day that it happens whether you feel like it or not. Feelings fluctuate, but structure stabilizes. When effort happens by design, you remove decision fatigue, the silent killer of motivation. You no longer debate whether to act. You simply follow your system. To strengthen the motivation loop, create visible proof of effort. The brain loves evidence. Whether through journaling, tracking progress, or logging hours, visual confirmation strengthens the sense of reward. It tells the subconscious that energy spent was meaningful. When the mind sees growth, even small growth, it amplifies commitment. What you track, you improve, because attention is energy. Keeping your results visible transforms motivation from fleeting emotion into observable progress. Another powerful technique is to associate effort with immediate satisfaction, not to distant reward. Many people delay their gratification so far into the future that their brain disconnects from the process. When the reward feels too remote, motivation fades. Instead, learn to link joy with the act itself, the focus, the movement, the sense of control. Find small pleasures in the process, the rhythm of typing, the silence before a workout, the moment of clarity that comes during focus. When you learn to enjoy the doing, the brain stops resisting effort because it stops perceiving it as pain. Deliberate effort also requires strategic rest. Motivation is not sustained by endless exertion, but by balanced cycles of push and recovery. Overwork exhausts the loop and dulls the sense of reward. The mind must have intervals to reset its anticipation system. A well-timed pause reignites desire. Rest strategically not as an escape, but as preparation for the next deliberate action. When effort and rest alternate rhythmically, the brain stays alert, eager, and responsive. Consistency compounds motivation. Each repeated act strengthens neural pathways, making effort feel natural. When you repeat an action daily, the cognitive load decreases. It requires less mental energy to start, leaving more for depth and mastery. Over time, the action feels automatic, almost effortless. The loop evolves from external discipline to internal instinct. You no longer push yourself into motion. Motion pulls you forward. That shift from force to flow is the mark of someone who has truly mastered motivation. Emotion will always fluctuate, but effort stabilizes it. On days when you feel low, effort creates spark. On days when you feel strong, effort magnifies momentum. This consistency rewires your emotional relationship with work. You stop seeing effort as a burden and start viewing it as medicine, a way to recalibrate your energy and mood. The irony is that effort gives back far more motivation than rest ever does. Stillness breeds stagnation, while movement breeds life. Another key to hacking motivation is minimizing unnecessary choices. Every decision costs willpower. The more decisions you remove from your day, the more energy remains for meaningful action. Prepare your environment in advance, lay out tools, plan tasks, remove friction. Friction is the enemy of momentum. The less resistance between you and your starting point, the faster your brain enters its productive rhythm. This design philosophy is not about control, it's about liberation. When your environment supports your goals, effort feels natural. Small rewards throughout the day also strengthen the loop. The brain responds best to immediate feedback. After completing a task, acknowledge it with satisfaction. A moment of stillness, a stretch, or even a mental nod of pride. This quick recognition solidifies the effort-reward connection. It teaches the mind to look forward to the feeling that comes after doing, not before. Over time, the craving for that feeling overrides procrastination. You start acting because you know how good it feels to finish. Deliberate daily effort must also have direction. Motivation without purpose fades quickly. Each action should connect to a deeper reason, something personal and meaningful. When effort aligns with purpose, energy sustains itself. Even on difficult days, that deeper reason acts as a compass. The brain is far more willing to endure discomfort when it knows why it's doing so. Purpose transforms effort from obligation to expression. You're no longer forcing yourself to act. You're fulfilling what matters most. To keep the loop dynamic, introduce variation within structure. Predictability builds habit, but small novelty prevents boredom. Slightly alter routines to keep the brain engaged. Change locations, adjust sequences, or shift timing. The novelty refreshes dopamine release without breaking consistency. You maintain the benefits of rhythm while keeping the process stimulating. Balance is key. Too much sameness dulls motivation. Too much randomness breaks momentum. When setbacks occur, don't break the loop. Shrink it. Do less, but do something. Missed days create guilt. Small wins preserve identity. Momentum thrives on continuity, not perfection. A short session keeps the psychological thread intact. Once you re-enter motion, motivation reignites naturally. The key is to never end the day fully detached from your effort. Even a brief action says, "I'm still in the game." That statement keeps the loop alive through storms of doubt. Eventually, deliberate daily effort evolves into something deeper, a kind of self-trust. You begin to rely on your own consistency more than fleeting enthusiasm. Motivation no longer feels like something to chase. It feels like something you generate on demand. Each act of effort reminds you of your own capability. That quiet confidence becomes your greatest source of strength. Motivation, when properly understood, is not a gift from the universe. It's a system you build through action, reward, and repetition. Every day you reinforce the loop. It becomes easier to activate. Action no longer depends on mood, and progress no longer depends on luck. When the brain learns that movement equals reward, it works for you, not against you. That's when ordinary effort becomes extraordinary achievement. The secret has always been simple. Don't wait to feel ready. Act to become ready. The doing creates the drive, and the drive sustains the doing. This is how deliberate daily effort transforms into unstoppable momentum, a loop of energy that feeds itself, one purposeful day at a time. Number 7. Transform procrastination into productive forward motion. Procrastination is not a flaw of character. It is a misfiring of the mind's natural defense mechanisms. The brain delays not because it wants to fail, but because it seeks to protect itself from discomfort, uncertainty, and the fear of inadequacy. When faced with something difficult or undefined, the mind shifts attention toward comfort. It promises temporary relief through distraction or delay, whispering that you'll start later when you feel more ready. But readiness never arrives, because readiness is born only through action. The truth is that procrastination can be transformed, not by fighting it, but by redirecting its energy into productive forward motion. At its core, procrastination is misplaced energy. It is momentum trapped in hesitation. The mind still moves. It thinks, worries, imagines, and plans, but all that movement happens internally instead of outwardly. The same force that fuels delay can fuel creation, if channeled correctly. Transformation begins with awareness, seeing procrastination not as laziness but as resistance, a signal that something meaningful lies ahead. You don't resist the trivial, you resist the significant. Understanding that resistance is proof of importance changes your relationship with it. You begin to see hesitation as an invitation to act, not as a command to stop. The first step toward transforming procrastination is to remove judgment. Shame paralyzes action more than fear itself. When you label yourself as lazy or unmotivated, you strengthen the identity of someone who avoids rather than someone who overcomes. Instead of attacking yourself, observe the delay neutrally. Ask, what am I avoiding feeling right now? Often, the answer is discomfort, imperfection, or the weight of uncertainty. Naming the emotion weakens its control. The act of honest observation returns you to the present moment, where action becomes possible. Once awareness is established, the next step is reduction. Procrastination thrives on overwhelm. When a task feels too large, the brain defaults to escape. The cure is to shrink the scale of entry. Break the action into something so small it feels almost trivial to start. Begin with the smallest possible step. Opening the file, writing a single sentence, making one call, or setting up the tools. The brain resists massive leaps, but accepts small movement easily. Once motion begins, inertia takes over. The mind realizes it's easier to continue than to stop. What seemed impossible becomes manageable through initiation. Time manipulation is another powerful tool against procrastination. The mind exaggerates the perceived effort of a task, turning a simple 20-minute action into an imagined ordeal lasting hours. Combat this distortion by setting short, non-negotiable time blocks. Tell yourself you will work for 5 or 10 minutes only. This limited commitment lowers mental resistance. Most of the time, once the timer begins, focus deepens naturally, and you surpass the intended duration without noticing. The purpose isn't to finish everything at once, but to start often enough that momentum replaces avoidance. Environment plays an equally crucial role. Procrastination thrives in spaces filled with temptation and clutter. The surroundings act as silent triggers that either promote clarity or feed distraction. Simplify your space. Remove unnecessary items, silence notifications, close extra tabs, and place visual reminders of progress where you can see them. The goal is to make movement the easiest choice and avoidance the hardest. Environmental design is not about discipline. It's about reducing friction. When action becomes frictionless, even reluctant energy finds direction. One of the most subtle drivers of procrastination is perfectionism. The fear of not doing something perfectly often prevents you from starting at all. The remedy is permission to begin messy, to make mistakes, to produce something incomplete. Completion matters more than precision in the early stages. The mind learns through repetition, not through hesitation. When you allow imperfection, you remove the mental wall that separates intention from execution. The first attempt doesn't need to be excellent. It only needs to exist. Improvement follows action, never precedes it. Another useful shift is reframing tasks from obligation to opportunity. When the mind perceives something as a burden, it resists. When it sees meaning or growth, it leans in. Instead of saying, I have to do this, rephrase it as, I get to do this, or this action moves me closer to who I want to be. The wording seems small, but it transforms emotional engagement. The same task that felt heavy becomes lighter because it now aligns with your personal narrative of progress. Meaning dissolves resistance faster than willpower ever could. Momentum builds through rhythm. The key is to create consistent sequences of small wins that reinforce your sense of control. Procrastination feeds on uncertainty, but rhythm starves it. By assigning specific times or rituals to recurring actions, you automate initiation. For example, writing for 15 minutes after breakfast, or planning the next day before bed. The brain loves predictability. It turns deliberate effort into habit. Each repetition weakens resistance and strengthens the identity of someone who follows through. With time, procrastination loses its power because the system runs itself. Self-dialogue determines how you experience effort. The inner critic often fuels procrastination by magnifying mistakes and minimizing progress. Replace criticism with instruction. Instead of thinking, I can't do this, think, what is the first thing I can do? This question transforms paralysis into problem solving. It shifts attention from what's wrong to what's possible. Language is powerful. The words you use internally sculpt your perception of control. Empowering language breeds movement. Emotional momentum is equally important. The body and mind are connected. Physical energy influences mental clarity. Movement often dissolves stagnation. When you feel stuck, take a brief walk, stretch, or breathe deeply. These small physical resets recalibrate focus. They remind the brain that action, not rumination, restores control. The simple act of moving forward in space often reignites the desire to move forward in thought. Productive motion also thrives on feedback. When progress is visible, effort feels rewarding. Track your actions. No matter how small, create visual proof of consistency. A calendar with marks, a journal of tasks completed, or a digital tracker. Seeing evidence of motion activates pride and encourages continuation. The mind loves completion loops. Each visible mark of progress becomes a symbol of discipline that silences doubt. One of the deepest transformations comes from understanding that procrastination is not an enemy, but a teacher. It reveals where fear hides. It shows which areas of life still hold emotional resistance. Each delay carries information about priorities, values, and insecurities. Instead of suppressing it, study it. Ask why the hesitation exists. Sometimes procrastination signals that the task lacks alignment with your true goals. Other times, it exposes where growth is required. In both cases, the awareness brings you closer to truth and control. To sustain productive motion, focus on identity rather than results. Tell yourself, I am someone who moves forward, even when progress feels slow. Identity guides action more effectively than goals do. When you internalize the belief that you take action despite uncertainty, your behavior aligns automatically. You stop negotiating with hesitation because it no longer fits who you are. The person who identifies as disciplined does not wait for courage. They simply act in alignment with their identity. Transforming procrastination also requires compassion. You cannot bully yourself into progress. Pressure creates rebellion. Instead, approach yourself like a mentor guiding a student, with firmness but empathy. Recognize the effort in starting again. Even after many false beginnings, progress is rarely linear. Every attempt to overcome delay strengthens awareness, and every small action accumulates. You are rewiring your brain each time you choose motion over avoidance. When forward movement becomes habitual, procrastination transforms into pause, a momentary hesitation that no longer derails but informs. You become someone who acts despite the presence of doubt. Each day becomes an exercise in self-command, a training ground for deliberate motion. The feeling of resistance never fully disappears, but it loses authority. You learn to coexist with it, to acknowledge it, and still move forward. Ultimately, productive motion is a philosophy of living. It teaches that clarity arises from doing, not from thinking about doing. The moment you move, energy returns, and fear recedes. Every step forward diminishes the power of inertia. Progress, even in its smallest form, is victory. Over time, this momentum compounds into mastery. The same force that once delayed you becomes the same force that drives you. Procrastination is not destiny. It is potential misdirected. When you transform hesitation into motion, you reclaim that potential. You discover that progress doesn't require perfect conditions. It only requires beginning. Every action, no matter how small, sends a signal to the mind. We move now. That signal echoes through every aspect of life, strengthening confidence, clarity, and control. The transformation is not sudden, but it is certain. Procrastination loses its grip the moment action begins, and action begins the moment you decide that movement matters more than comfort. In that instant, the energy that once held you back becomes the very force that propels you forward. Number 8. Control impulses, delay gratification, strengthen willpower. Impulse is the instinctive voice of immediacy, a sudden pull that demands satisfaction now. It speaks in urges, in cravings, in shortcuts that promise quick comfort but offer no lasting fulfillment. Every human being feels its tug, yet those who learn to control it command their destiny. The difference between mediocrity and mastery often lies in the ability to pause between desire and decision. That space, the brief moment where choice resides, is where willpower is forged. Learning to control impulses and delay gratification is not about suppression. It is about strength, directing energy instead of being consumed by it. The modern world thrives on impulsive behavior. Every notification, every advertisement, every algorithm is designed to shorten attention and weaken patience. The brain, wired for novelty and reward, gets hijacked by stimuli that feed short-term pleasure. Yet what feels like choice is often manipulation. To reclaim control, one must step back and re-establish command over attention. The first victory is awareness. The recognition of the moment an impulse arises. When you notice the spark of desire before it turns into action, you create power. Observation interrupts automation. The simple act of noticing, "I want this," without obeying it, is the beginning of mastery. Delaying gratification is not denial. It is investment. It's the deliberate choice to sacrifice the thrill of now for the strength of later. This ability is what separates those who live reactively from those who live intentionally. The child who learns to wait for two rewards instead of grabbing one immediately develops a brain wired for endurance. The same principle applies to adults. Every time you delay a small pleasure, resisting a distraction, skipping an indulgence, completing the had task first, you teach your mind that it is capable of self-governance. This sense of control compounds over time, reinforcing identity and building inner stability. Willpower is often misunderstood as brute force, but true willpower is intelligent restraint. It's the quiet confidence that comes from being in control of one's reactions. Strengthening it is like training a muscle. It requires consistent resistance and gradual growth. You don't become strong by avoiding challenge. You become strong by meeting it with awareness. Each time you say no to a temptation, you reinforce the neural pathways that support discipline. The brain adapts to patterns. Repeated restraint creates habit. Over time, what once felt difficult becomes natural. The craving loses its authority because the self has reclaimed command. The process begins with small moments. Skip the unnecessary glance at your phone. Finish a task before taking a break. Eat mindfully instead of out of impulse. These choices might seem insignificant, but they build the foundation for larger victories. The human brain thrives on repetition. Each deliberate act of self-control becomes evidence of competence. Confidence grows from proof, not theory. You start to trust yourself to act according to principle rather than impulse. That trust is the essence of willpower. It transforms fleeting resistance into consistent power. Delaying gratification also reshapes how you experience time. When you always seek immediate satisfaction, the present moment becomes an escape from effort. But when you delay gratification, the present becomes a place of preparation. You begin to find meaning in waiting. Anticipation becomes a form of focus, not frustration. The patience you cultivate deepens your connection to purpose. You learn to measure progress, not by what you receive, but by what you resist. Waiting becomes strength because it is conscious choice, not helpless delay. The most effective way to strengthen willpower is through structured challenge. When you intentionally place yourself in small, controlled discomforts, you build endurance. Cold showers, fasting, timed work sessions, early rising. These practices are not punishments, but training tools. They teach the mind that it can endure discomfort without collapsing. The more you expose yourself to mild, deliberate struggle, the less fear controls you. The brain stops associating difficulty with danger. It starts linking discipline with empowerment. Each time you voluntarily choose what's hard, you build armor for moments when life gives you no choice. Impulse control also requires energy management. Willpower depletes when the mind and body are exhausted. Fatigue makes you vulnerable to shortcuts. Sleep, Nutrition and mental recovery are the hidden pillars of discipline. When the body is neglected, the mind becomes reactive. To sustain control, you must maintain balance. Rest is not weakness, it's reinforcement. A disciplined mind rests strategically so it can fight effectively. The paradox of control is that it flourishes only when nurtured, not forced. Environment plays a silent but dominant role in controlling impulses. You cannot expect to resist temptation if you live surrounded by it. Self-control is easier when you design your surroundings to align with your values. Remove triggers, limit access to distractions, and make good choices the default. Create friction for the habits you want to eliminate, and remove friction for the habits you want to adopt. If your phone is in another room, you won't reach for it without thought. If healthy food is in front of you, you'll eat it naturally. The environment shapes behavior far more efficiently than willpower alone. Strengthening willpower also means aligning it with meaning. Empty restraint leads to resentment, but purposeful restraint leads to pride. When you remember why you're choosing discipline, when the vision of your future self feels vivid, the present sacrifice feels worthwhile. The mind needs a why to sustain a how. This is where visualization becomes powerful. Imagine the version of yourself who already possesses the results you desire. Picture how they act, decide, and carry themselves. Each time you resist an impulse, you move closer to that identity. The alignment between vision and action fuels persistence. The gap between impulse and action is the most valuable space a human can learn to control. In that pause lies every major decision that shapes character. When anger arises, the pause prevents regret. When temptation calls, the pause restores clarity. The strength to delay a reaction by even a few seconds is enough to rewrite behavior. That delay allows reason to overtake instinct. It's not about killing emotion, it's about guiding it. Mastery comes when feeling no longer dictates action, but rather informs it. The discipline to delay gratification also sharpens perception. When you stop chasing every impulse, the noise quiets. You start to notice what truly matters. The rush of constant stimulation dulls appreciation, but patience deepens it. The coffee tastes richer when earned after effort. Rest feels profound after a day of work. Satisfaction expands because you've learned contrast. Without instant gratification, joy regains meaning. The capacity to wait makes every reward more vibrant because it carries the weight of intention. Over time, consistent restraint leads to self-respect. There's a distinct pride that comes from knowing you can command yourself. You no longer rely on external validation because inner discipline becomes your identity. You feel grounded, stable, and unshaken by distraction. The world may pull, but you decide when to move. This autonomy is freedom, the freedom to choose rather than react. And freedom, paradoxically, comes from structure. Building willpower does not mean denying pleasure forever. It means mastering the timing of pleasure so it serves you instead of sabotaging you. When you control when and how you indulge, enjoyment becomes deliberate, not desperate. You experience things deeply, not compulsively. The same mind that once chased comfort now creates it. Discipline does not shrink life. It expands it. Because when your impulses are under your command, nothing owns you. In moments of weakness, remember that the urge will always pass. Every craving, every impulse, no matter how strong, has a lifespan. If you can outlast the wave, you win. Breathe through it. Observe it rise, peak, and fall. What remains afterward is you, unbroken, present, in control. Each time you endure that process, the next wave becomes easier to handle. You are not your impulse, you are the awareness that witnesses it. Eventually, the practice of control becomes second nature. You no longer battle every temptation because they lose their pull. You choose wisely, almost effortlessly. Because your mind and will are aligned, the strength you built through countless small moments of restraint accumulates quietly, like compound interest in your character. The discipline you forged becomes permanent armor. True power is not in doing whatever you want. It's in the ability to decide what truly serves you. When you control your impulses, you control your direction. When you delay gratification, you master your future. When you strengthen willpower, you shape your destiny with precision. These are not abstract virtues. They are the foundations of freedom, stability, and fulfillment. Each act of restraint becomes a declaration, I am in command. Over time, that declaration ceases to be a statement and becomes your nature. The strongest person is not the one who conquers others, but the one who conquers themselves. And that strength begins with a single pause, a single decision, and the quiet power to wait. Number 9. Build resilience through consistent cognitive challenges. Resilience is not born in comfort. It is shaped in challenge. The human mind becomes stronger only when it is stretched beyond what feels easy. Just as muscles require resistance to grow, mental endurance depends on consistent cognitive struggle. Every time the brain encounters something it cannot immediately solve, it has a choice: retreat or adapt. When it chooses to adapt, new pathways form, and what was once impossible becomes familiar. This process, slow, demanding, and often uncomfortable, is how resilience is built. It's not a single act of courage, but a gradual conditioning of thought to endure pressure, recover from setbacks, and continue forward with clarity. Cognitive resilience begins with how you respond to difficulty. When faced with a challenge that overwhelms, the untrained mind reacts with frustration, avoidance, or self-doubt. But a trained mind views that same difficulty as an opportunity to strengthen itself. The difference is perspective. Resilient thinkers don't see problems as walls, they see them as weights to lift. The brain thrives on challenge when you remove the emotional resistance attached to it. Every complex problem, every moment of confusion, every obstacle that demands focus, these are the mental workouts that forge endurance. The brain, much like the body, rewards consistency, not intensity. Daily mental effort compounds into long-term strength. The most powerful way to develop cognitive resilience is through deliberate exposure to tasks that stretch your limits. This doesn't mean overwhelming yourself, it means intentionally engaging in activities that require sustained concentration and problem-solving. Read books that challenge your comprehension. Learn a skill that forces you to think differently. Engage in conversations that test your reasoning. Every time you confront something that initially frustrates you, you train your mind to tolerate and then thrive under pressure. Over time, your threshold for difficulty expands. What once caused mental fatigue becomes effortless, and that progress fuels further growth. The reason many people struggle with resilience is that they avoid discomfort. The moment something feels mentally demanding, they switch tasks, scroll, or escape. That habit weakens neural endurance. The mind learns that it can always seek refuge in distraction instead of persistence. To reverse this, discipline yourself to sit with difficulty. When you encounter confusion, resist the urge to escape. Stay with the problem until you make progress. Even if the progress is small, the act of persistence rewires your brain for endurance. This conditioning teaches the mind to associate effort with eventual clarity instead of frustration. That shift in association is where resilience is born. One of the most effective ways to strengthen mental resilience is to practice focus under fatigue. When your brain feels tired, your ability to think clearly diminishes, but that is precisely when growth occurs. If you can maintain composure and clarity when mentally exhausted, you expand your limits. It's not about pushing recklessly. It's about steady persistence when comfort fades. Each time you maintain discipline through mental fatigue, you prove to yourself that you are capable of more than your mind initially allows. That evidence compounds into confidence, and confidence is the foundation of resilience. Challenges that require both patience and precision are especially powerful for developing mental endurance. Activities like writing, learning a new language, solving complex problems, or mastering an instrument demand consistent focus over long periods. These tasks train the brain to remain engaged despite setbacks. They teach delayed reward and reinforce persistence. When the brain learns that effort eventually yields mastery, it becomes more resistant to giving up. This learned resilience extends to every aspect of life: work, relationships, decision-making, because the same neural circuits govern persistence across all domains. Another key component of building resilience is adaptability. Life rarely unfolds according to plan, And the ability to adjust quickly without collapsing under stress is the hallmark of a resilient mind. Cognitive flexibility develops when you regularly expose yourself to new ideas, perspectives, and challenges. When you force your brain to learn unfamiliar patterns, you teach it to respond creatively instead of rigidly. This adaptability allows you to recover faster when life disrupts your expectations. The more you adapt, the less intimidating change becomes. You start to view uncertainty as a training ground rather than a threat. Resilience also depends on your internal dialogue. The way you speak to yourself during challenge determines whether you endure or surrender. A mind that constantly repeats, "I can't do this," will obey that command. But a mind that reframes struggle as progress will persist even through difficulty. Replace frustration with curiosity. Instead of saying, "This is too hard," ask, "What can I learn from this?" The question changes your emotional state from resistance to exploration. Cognitive resilience thrives in minds that remain inquisitive under pressure. The more curious you become, the less fear controls you. Another essential practice is reflection. After every challenging experience, take time to analyze how you responded. Did you retreat, endure, or adapt? What thoughts surfaced when the task became uncomfortable? Reflection transforms raw struggle into structured learning. It helps you identify patterns that limit your endurance and replace them with strategies that reinforce resilience. Over time, reflection turns effort into wisdom. The resilient mind doesn't just endure, it learns to extract meaning from every obstacle. Resilience grows stronger when paired with emotional regulation. The ability to stay calm while the mind is under strain allows you to think clearly and act effectively. Stress narrows perception, making problems appear larger than they are. When you breathe deeply, slow your reactions, and recenter your attention, you regain control. A calm mind endures longer. Techniques such as controlled breathing, mindfulness, or even silent observation during moments of difficulty train your nervous system to remain stable under pressure. Stability allows logic to stay active when emotions try to take over. To develop consistent cognitive strength, you must also manage recovery. Just as muscles need rest after resistance, the brain needs reflection and restoration after intense challenge. Resilience is built in cycles of strain and recovery. Without adequate rest, the mind burns out instead of growing. Quality sleep, time in nature, silence, and meaningful breaks allow neural circuits to consolidate learning and repair. The goal is not endless effort, but sustainable effort. Consistency, not exhaustion, creates resilience. One overlooked element of cognitive resilience is purpose. The mind can endure almost any hardship when it knows why it must. When your challenges connect to something meaningful, your capacity to persist expands dramatically. Purpose transforms difficulty into duty. It gives context to struggle and frames it as preparation rather than punishment. When you connect each effort to a vision beyond yourself, growth, contribution, mastery, the discomfort becomes a companion rather than an enemy. Resilience is easier to sustain when you believe the struggle matters. Even failure plays an essential role in building resilience. Each time you fail, you confront the limits of your current ability. That confrontation is uncomfortable but necessary. If you interpret failure as evidence of weakness, you stop growing. But if you see it as feedback, it becomes a map for improvement. Failure exposes the edges of your competence. When you study those edges and return stronger, your mind becomes less fearful of risk. Resilience thrives in people who no longer see failure as final but as a step in refinement. Consistency remains the unshakable law of growth. Sporadic effort creates temporary strength, but daily engagement creates permanence. The mind responds best to steady repetition. Even small challenges faced regularly, solving puzzles, writing reflections, practicing focus compound into profound endurance. What matters is not how hard you push once, but how faithfully you return to the challenge each day. Over time, this repetition ingrains fortitude into your character. You no longer have to summon resilience. You become it. Cognitive challenges don't just build intelligence, they build identity. Every time you overcome confusion, frustration, or fatigue, you redefine who you are, You stop identifying as someone who struggles and start seeing yourself as someone who endures. That identity shift changes how you meet future challenges. You begin to expect resilience from yourself. You stop running from hard things because you know that struggle is not punishment but proof of progress. Ultimately, resilience is not about never breaking. It's about learning to bend and return stronger. The mind that consistently engages with challenge becomes unshakable. Not because it avoids hardship, but because it understands hardship's purpose. Every difficulty becomes training, every setback a lesson, every demand a chance to grow. With consistent cognitive challenge, the brain evolves from fragile to formidable. You become capable of maintaining clarity under chaos, calm under stress, and focus under fatigue. The greatest reward of building mental resilience is freedom. The freedom to trust yourself in any circumstance. When your mind has been trained to endure, adapt, and think under pressure, no situation feels insurmountable. You carry inner stability that cannot be shaken by external turbulence, and in that strength lies peace. The storms may continue, but you stand steady, not because life is easier, but because you are stronger. Each challenge faced, each thought refined, each obstacle endured becomes another brick in the fortress of your mind, a fortress built not overnight, but through the quiet, deliberate discipline of consistent cognitive challenge. Number 10. Command your thoughts. Execute without emotional permission. The human mind is a battlefield where thoughts compete for control. Some thoughts inspire action, others sow doubt, and many exist only to distract. To command your thoughts means to lead that internal army with authority instead of letting it revolt against you. It is the art of discipline over emotion, of intention over impulse. Most people live as prisoners of their feelings, waiting until they feel like it before acting, allowing moods to dictate effort. But those who master their mind understand that emotion is not a command. It is merely information. Feelings can be acknowledged, but they should never decide your direction. The most powerful people in history acted despite resistance from within. They executed not because they felt ready, but because they decided to. The mind produces endless streams of thoughts every day. Many of them are reactive, shaped by fear, memory, or external influence. Left unchecked, these thoughts form patterns that quietly dictate behavior. The first step in commanding your thoughts is awareness. Without awareness, the mind becomes the master and you its servant. Awareness gives you the space to see a thought for what it is. A suggestion, not a law. When anger rises, you notice it. When self-doubt appears, you observe it without surrendering. That space between thought and action is where freedom lives. You can choose which thoughts deserve your energy and which to release. The act of choosing is mental sovereignty. Every action begins with a thought, but not every thought deserves to become action. Commanding your mind means filtering what gets expressed. Just because you think something does not make it true. Just because you feel resistance does not make the task impossible. When a negative thought surfaces, challenge it directly. Ask yourself if it serves your purpose or weakens it. Replace unhelpful thoughts with objective statements rooted in reason. Emotion clouds logic. Clarity restores control. Over time, this mental discipline becomes instinctive. The mind learns to align itself with direction rather than drift toward distraction. Execution without emotional permission means refusing to wait for perfect internal conditions. The reality is that motivation is unreliable. There will be days when you wake up without energy, without enthusiasm, without inspiration. Those are the moments that define growth. Discipline must replace motivation. The Stoics understood this deeply. They acted according to principle, not preference. If a task is necessary, it deserves action regardless of emotional resistance. Feelings can protest, but the body moves anyway. Each time you act while emotions rebel, you weaken their control. Eventually, emotion stops dictating behavior and becomes background noise. One practical method to cultivate this discipline is mental detachment. Detachment is not indifference. It is perspective. When you feel overwhelmed, anxious, or unmotivated, step outside the storm of thought. View your emotions as weather passing through, not as your identity. You can acknowledge the rain without drowning in it. This mental separation allows logic to remain functional when emotion is chaotic. When you detach, you gain command of timing. You decide when to act, not your feelings. The ability to delay reaction until the mind is calm is one of the strongest forms of self-control. Another powerful technique is mental reframing. The way you interpret situations shapes the emotions they trigger. If you see an obstacle as punishment, frustration grows. If you view it as training, motivation appears. Reframing transforms how you think, which changes how you feel, which then changes how you act. The sequence always begins in thought. Commanding your mind means mastering interpretation before reaction. When challenges arise, choose the perspective that strengthens, not weakens, your resolve. The external event is neutral. Your perception defines its meaning. A strong mind assigns meaning that fuels progress. The act of execution without emotional permission also requires trust and decision. Overthinking is the enemy of action. The more you analyze, the more emotional friction you generate. Doubt breeds hesitation, and hesitation feeds fear. Once you've made a clear decision based on reason, commit to it fully. Execution teaches clarity faster than endless contemplation. Most mental chaos fades once movement begins. The discipline of decisive action trains the mind to rely on principle instead of mood. Acting quickly when the direction is clear reduces emotional interference and builds momentum. Command over thought does not mean suppressing emotion. Suppression only strengthens resistance. Instead, it means observing emotion, respecting its message, but proceeding according to your value. Anger might tell you something feels unjust. Anxiety might warn you of uncertainty. Sadness might signal loss. Listen, interpret, and then decide with reason. Emotion informs. It does not instruct. This distinction prevents you from becoming reactive. You remain composed even when emotions surge. This calmness is not coldness. It is control. True strength is gentle because it does not need to prove itself. To consistently execute without emotional permission, structure becomes essential. Routine is the scaffolding that supports discipline when willpower weakens. When your actions follow a system rather than a feeling, emotion loses leverage. Morning routines, time blocks, and deliberate rituals all reduce the need for emotional negotiation. The brain thrives on patterns. Predictability minimizes resistance. If you decide in advance when and how something will be done, you don't waste energy arguing with yourself in the moment. Structure frees mental energy for creation instead of hesitation. Commanding your thoughts also involves protecting what enters your mind. The environment you expose yourself to shapes internal dialogue. Negative inputs produce reactive thinking. Constructive ones cultivate focus. Choose your information diet wisely. What you read, watch, and discuss becomes the language your thoughts use. The mind echoes what it consumes. Surround yourself with ideas, people, and messages that strengthen rather than scatter your thinking. A disciplined mind is not isolated, it is selective. Guarding attention is the foundation of thought mastery. The more you practice conscious thinking, the quieter your mind becomes. Over time, mental noise reduces because the brain learns what thoughts are worth entertaining. When self-criticism arises, you no longer wrestle with it, you acknowledge it, and move on. When fear surfaces, you note its presence, but refuse its control. This internal clarity allows faster execution and deeper peace. You stop wasting time debating with yourself and start spending energy doing what matters. The mind that once resisted you now works for you. When emotions attempt to paralyze action, focus on principle. Principles act as anchors that prevent you from being swept away by feeling. Honor, responsibility, discipline, integrity, these are not mood-dependent. They guide action even when emotion disagrees. For example, if your principle is consistency, you act even when tired. If your principle is truth, you speak even when afraid. Acting from principle builds trust in yourself. That trust becomes a shield against emotional volatility. The more you live by principle, the less emotional turbulence influences behavior. To strengthen command over thoughts, practice silence. Stillness reveals what the mind hides in noise. In silence, you can watch thought patterns form and dissolve. You see how quickly the mind jumps from idea to idea, emotion to emotion. The observation itself creates distance, and distance gives power. Meditation, journaling, or simply sitting quietly for a few minutes each day strengthens this control. When you become comfortable with your thoughts, they lose their grip. Silence transforms chaos into clarity because it teaches you that you are not your thinking, you are its observer. Commanding your mind also requires humility. The ego often feels emotional resistance. It wants comfort, validation, and control. But mastery demands surrender of egoic impulses. When you remove the need to always feel good, the mind becomes obedient to purpose. You stop seeking motivation and start creating it through discipline. Each act of control over thought reinforces humility because it reminds you that emotions are temporary guests, not permanent residents. You can experience them fully without allowing them to dictate your path. The journey to full mental command is lifelong. There will always be moments of doubt, distraction, and emotional turbulence. But the difference between those who falter and those who rise lies in how they respond. The resilient mind doesn't demand silence from emotion. It demands obedience from reaction. It acknowledges fear but walks forward. It feels doubt but acts anyway. Over time, this deliberate defiance of emotional permission becomes instinct. You no longer negotiate with hesitation. You move and emotion adjusts afterward. When thought and action align under discipline, life becomes lighter. You spend less energy battling internal resistance because your direction is fixed. Confidence replaces confusion. You begin to trust your ability to act under any condition. That trust is the highest form of strength. When emotions no longer control your behavior, they lose their power to sabotage you. You gain the freedom to think clearly, decide swiftly, and live deliberately. Commanding your thoughts and executing without emotional permission is not about suppressing humanity. It's about refining it. It's the art of being guided by reason while remaining deeply human. You feel, but you do not falter. You experience emotion, but you are not enslaved by it. You think, choose, and act with precision. This is the mind's ultimate victory, the moment when emotion becomes an ally, not a master. From that place, action flows effortlessly. Not because it's easy, but because you are in command. And when you reach that state, nothing within you can stop what you have decided to do, and nothing outside you can break the calm that comes from complete control.